will win. Getting is critical as cases in the U.S. skyrocket, with the virus killing more than 257,000 people in the U.S. Dr. Tony Fauci warning deaths may top 300,000 by the end of the year. In New York City, Staten Island's become a COVID hotspot.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he is reopening an emergency COVID-19 field hospital on Staten Island.
The number of hospitalizations in Staten Island have gone over the last 3 weeks. They've basically tripled, 33 to 91.
The Staten Island Hospital will be the first such facility in the state to relaunch since New York partly tamed the pandemic over the summer. Gary Baumgarten, Fox News.
And U.S. stocks rose Monday on more promising vaccine news. The Dow rose 327 points. America's listening to Fox News.
As we celebrate Thanksgiving this year in a very different way, the team at Security Title has been busy focusing on the vendors, buyers and sellers, and other partners in the real estate industry. From the Security Title family, we wish you and yours a very blessed Thanksgiving.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
New York City's first black mayor has died. The New York Post reporting David Dinkins died Monday night at his Manhattan home. He was elected in 1989 and famously referred to the nation's largest city as a glorious mosaic. Dinkins was 93. President-elect Joe Biden's picks to join his cabinet include a lot of familiar names from the Obama administration.
Biden's pick for Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, served as the second in command at state as Deputy Secretary under the Obama-Biden administration. Biden's appointee for Head of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, is also an Obama alum. Biden is also appointing the first woman to be the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. She worked as Deputy CIA Director under Obama. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's coming out of retirement to take this job. Biden's national security advisor will be Jake Sullivan, who was a key negotiator of the Iran nuclear deal.
Fox's Hillary Vaughn. A prosecutor in San Francisco files criminal charges against a police officer for the fatal shooting of a black man.
Officer Chris Samayoa was only 4 days into the job when he fatally shot Kata O'Neill during a pursuit in December 2017. District Attorney Chase Abudin says Samayoa was in the passenger seat of a police cruiser and fired through the window of his door, striking O'Neill as he ran beside the car.
Not a single other officer pulled out their service weapon or pointed it at Mr. O'Neill.
Abudin says this is the first time his office charged a law enforcement officer for a homicide while on duty.
San Francisco is charting a new course.
Steve Rappaport, Fox News.
And a high school in Texas opens a grocery store for students and accepts good deeds as payment. Linda Tudd High School in Sanger, about 60 miles outside Dallas, partnered with nonprofits to help with food insecurity for students and staffs during the pandemic. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Rolling sound, quiet, and action.
The Ray Gibson Show, starring Senator Mona Silva Tyron as the news anchor.
I'm Mona Silva Tyron, and I'll have your local news every morning. Life moves pretty fast, so stay with us to stay informed right here on The Point.
Also starring Jerry Roberts as the Better Business Training Guru.
Get out there and do something good today, like listen to us Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m., where we go extra for you.
Produced by the real Joe Cruz. And your warm and intelligent host, Ray Gibson.
It's the Gibson Stream of Consciousness. All the players and all the games with cameos and calls from the most interesting people like you. We'll see and hear you right here on your talk radio superstation. This is The Point.
The Ray Gibson Show was filmed before a live Facebook audience.
As the island takes a stand against the coronavirus, so do the professionals at Horizon Properties. As a property owner and with the current health scare the island is facing, the last thing you should worry about is collecting rental payments or sending out a repairman to your property. Let Horizon Properties take care of that for you as you remain safe at home. Call Horizon Properties at 646-7616 or 777-7792. You can also visit them at www.horizonproperties.com. Horizon Properties, always there for you.
It's time to mix things up at Subway. Come in and get Subway's new barbecue chicken sandwich. Tender chicken strips topped with generous portions of sweet barbecue sauce.
Oh, yeah.
Add on crisp lettuce, onions, and tangy pickles on your favorite freshly baked bread. Perfect to satisfy just about anyone's flavor craving. It's Subway's new barbecue chicken sandwich, available for limited time only, so try it today. At Subway, make it what you want.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific. Banking on the Pacific for 66 years. Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Security Title, providing solutions for complex real estate transactions.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
Yeah, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I just can't put too much emphasis on that little verse that I repeat on a daily basis to remind myself and all of the tailgaters out there in our international radio listening audience that this is a Constitution-oriented, conservative talk show. As a matter of fact, Tall Tales is the top-rated afternoon FM talk show in the Western Pacific, as determined by the statistical workshop in the Tall Tales think tank. Right, Jose?
And this news desk.
And the news desk also. All right. Doesn't get any better than that. Let's go from there straight to Zemi Ikotny. Just to bolster the credibility of the Tall Tales news desk, I believe it was the Tall Tales news desk that called the presidential election for me, right?
Yes, sir.
So I can now hold myself out as the president-elect.
And we did so with confidence.
Very good. Okay, let's talk about the Daily News. Once again, the Daily News is not running a local editorial. They aren't even telling us where they got this one. Oh, I'm sorry, it's from USA Today. And it says state vaccine reviews could create issues. And during the campaign, President Donald Trump pushed inappropriately to get a coronavirus vaccine approved before the election so he could claim credit. they just cannot resist. The Food and Drug Administration, the drug companies developed these vaccines, and other healthcare authorities resisted, saying the time was needed to test vaccines, etc. Their courage was apparently not enough to convince some Americans. The corners weren't cut in the rapid development of vaccines, two of which have already shown extraordinary promise and appear on track for emergency youth authorization next month. Now, in a bid to alleviate this public skepticism, the National Medical Association and African American Doctors Association and 5 states have announced plans to conduct their own reviews of clinical data before endorsing the widespread dissemination of vaccines. This extra layer of review is more likely to add to the concern rather than allay it. And then they go on to make the case that, you know, the Fauci and the rest of them know what they're doing. But I want to zero in on the National Medical Association. Their courage was apparently not enough to convince some Americans the corners weren't cut. And then, in a bid to alleviate this public skepticism, the National Medical Association, an African American Doctors Association. So let's just get out the history book for a minute. You know, the American colonization started in 1619, and contrary to what the New York Times said, that isn't when slavery began on the North American continent. And I've been into that before, indentured servitude and all the rest of that stuff. But anyhow, slavery was a bad thing. And the United States embraced it for quite some time. It took over 660,000 Americans were killed in the Civil War to bring about an end to slavery. We went from there to a short Reconstruction period, which ended when the Republicans threw in the towel so that Rutherford B. Hayes could become president. Then we saw the advent of black codes in the southern states, so that the status of former slaves really didn't improve that much. Around the turn of the century, we came up with Jim Crow and grandfather clauses, which I've ranted against on more than one occasion. In 1896, the United States Supreme Court decided, in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, that you could separate the races so long as those separated races were treated equally. Separate but equal was okay. In 1954, the Supreme Court, in a case called Brown versus Board of Education, which is not my favorite case, but anyhow, it stands for the proposition that separation ipso facto is unequal. The mere fact, even if you had a team of scientists certifying that the way the races had been separated meant that each race was being treated equally, the mere separation is an invidious discrimination and cannot stand. If we had stuck with that, if we had gone down from there and said our government has got to be colorblind, because discrimination, even for a good cause, is a bad thing. But we didn't do that. So, and I'll explain that someday when we do an autopsy on Brown versus Board. Next chapter, in 1965, we passed some extremely broad-based civil rights laws that were designed to eliminate segregation, which we thought was the evil in the whole post-slavery era. So we bust kids from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, did all kinds of things to end segregation. And I think, at least in my travels around the mainland, and I'm old enough to remember driving through the southern part of the United States and seeing colored-only water fountains and colored-only restrooms. And I even went to a segregated school in Miami. Yeah. In 7th grade, 1951.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Seeing how integrated Miami is these days.
Right. So it seemed to me that if separating people on the basis of race is not a good thing, the United States went a long, long way to end that separation. But now it seems like there are some people who want to go back. The African American Doctors Association, as an example. So it seems like there are elements in the society that want to separate the races. They want to separate the black race from the white race, et cetera, for reasons that they are quite able to articulate. Maybe this is an example. Yeah, maybe not. But anyhow, that's the daily news for today. I didn't like their editorial very much, so I plucked one from a website called The Spectator that makes exactly the case that I tried to make about what's wrong with what happened with our electoral process this year and why we need to fix it. And the editorial is called "The Urgent Case for Voting Reform." It's obvious that mass mail-in voting and days of drawn-out counting maximize opportunities for chicanery. By now, the American spectator knows better than to say that Donald Trump has been definitively beaten. The president's final defeat has been proudly proclaimed and then undermined so many times that the wisest course is to assume he will always rise again. Donald P. Trump. You know what the P stands for? Phoenix.
Oh, I thought president.
He will rise again. The president did not fail in the hearts of his supporters. Most will agree they did not lose this race. It was stolen from them. In the late hours of November 3, the president's lead seemed insurmountable, his victory inevitable. Defying the polls, he wound to easy wins in Florida, Texas, Iowa, and Ohio. The New York Times needle showed him on track to win Georgia by 4 points. Election night tally showed him ahead by hundreds of thousands of votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. On the betting website, Bovada, Trump's odds of victory peaked at nearly 90% just after 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Everyone knows what happened after that. For the president's supporters and the president himself, there's only one explanation: fraud, shenanigans, perfidy, theft. The Spectator, notwithstanding the contrary opinions of some of its wide contributors, finds this unlikely. Unlimited time and investigation resources would doubtlessly find hundreds of fraudulent ballots, the product of rogue actors doing their best to marginally affect the outcome. And by the way, we're going to talk about a couple of our own rogue actors right here on the island. First item on the card. But Biden's margins in the critical states were measured by thousands and tens of thousands. And it wasn't the big, infamously corrupt urban counties that Biden took over the top in the critical states. It was suburban counties that turned against the president, transforming his narrow 2016 victory into a narrow 2020 defeat. The president's loss, as shocking as it seemed in the moment, was likely legitimate. But in any democratic system, the perception of fairness matters nearly as much as the real thing. You remember my little comparison of absolutely correct results and apparently fair procedures? The better of the two is apparently fair procedures. People don't like it when they watch something that doesn't seem to be fair and correct. The cause of this mistrust is obvious. Biden's election victory, instead of coming suddenly, was drawn out like a long, agonizing death. In Wisconsin, it took until early Wednesday morning for him to take the lead. In Pennsylvania and Georgia, it took until Friday. Slow counting wasn't limited to closely contested states. 2 weeks after, quote, Election Day, close quote, New York still hadn't counted roughly 15% of its votes. The slow counting was paired with one of the longest and least regulated voting periods in the country's history. It doesn't matter if evidence of widespread fraud has been limited. It is obvious that mass mail-in voting and days of drawn-out counting maximize opportunities for chicanery. A drawn-out election is an election that invites fraud and the suspicion of fraud. If Washington's preferred presidential candidate in Ukraine had a large lead on election night, only to lose after 3 days of mail-in ballots swung the balance behind a rival, the cries of Russian malfeasance would be deafening. The same Republicans who urged Trump to concede this race would be speculating about military intervention. Without much debate and much cheerleading from the press, America is morphing into one of the banana republics it spent so much of the 20th century meddling with. In Pennsylvania, mail-in ballots could be counted with no postmark and without a signature match. In California, paid political operatives were allowed to harvest ballots by the hundreds from voters, and mail-in votes could arrive and be counted until November 20. Voter IDs law come and go almost at random, and voting machines have no uniform standard. There's obviously absolutely no need for all this absurdity. In France, postal votes have been banned. Vive la France. In most circumstances since the 1970s, due to mail voter fraud. In Deutschland, electronic voting machines were ruled unconstitutional on the grounds that they require specialist knowledge beyond most voters. In the Netherlands, postal voting is only available for outside the country on election day for voters wearing wooden shoes. You're thinking of Ray Gibson. Yeah, that's better. The country has eliminated all electronic voting and tallying. Every single vote in the country is cast and counted by hand. Miraculously, without any 21st century technology that America grossly overpays for, the Netherlands has no trouble tallying votes quickly. Polls close at 9 p.m. and the final results are often in by midnight. Yeah. And they're still working with windmills over there. No Cabras 1, Cabras 2 for them. America could learn from all these examples, and in fact, it must. Because if America tries to make it through a future truly close election with the mess of a system it has now, democracy may not survive. Now, it's nice to find someone here who will say that there's a danger of the survival of democracy that doesn't blame it on Trump. You don't see that every day. A repeat of the 2000 Florida debacle, with the presidency coming down to just a few hundred votes in a massive state, would almost certainly end in street violence or worse if it happened again. The only way America can prevent such a disaster going forward is to have an electoral system the public can understand and trust. And so it's past time that America brought its voting into the 21st century by bringing it back to the 19th. Voting should be on paper ballots, counted by hand by volunteers. Early voting is fine, but absentee voting should return to its original purpose, allowing those who will be absent on Election Day to cast their vote. Voter ID should be a given. Above all, America must reclaim the idea of election night. Counting should be finished in hours, not days or weeks. Otherwise, the world's most powerful democracy risks becoming just another failed one. Exactly, and that's exactly what I've been saying. You know, it has to be something that the people trust. So, and my suggestion was everybody votes on the same day, and if there are absentee ballots, they've got to be at the polling place no later than the day before the election. Count the votes and get it over with. Now, I know this guy over here. Where is he? He's over there in his lazy boy chair. He's saying, yeah, but mail-in voting's a lot easier. It is. It's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to scam. But it's not better. It's far worse. And all of the heartbreak that we went through in this election is because of mail-in voting. So let's junk it. Let's all vote on the same day. And if there's to be absentee voting or early voting, all of the votes have to be at the polling place on the day before the election, period. Good editorial. I guess I I ought to pay a little attention to the Post here today, too. The Post says, even in some of the worst events that caused Guam's tourist industry to slow down in recent decades, the Asian financial crisis in the 1990s, the 9/11 terror on attacks on the U.S., and the fear of travel due to the severe acute respiratory syndrome epidemic, Guam has not seen visitor arrivals plunge to near zero for nearly a year. In this Wuhan virus pandemic, this is our reality for a year now. Tourist arrivals have been down 99%. Government officials have used the phrase unprecedented to describe the magnitude of the problem. But the worst of our displaced workers' situations has yet to unfold. For months, they had at least some weekly cash coming in through the federal government unfunded unemployment benefits. These benefits are about to end because they are capped at 39 weeks. And GovGuam has not had a locally funded unemployment program to keep this financial lifeline coming. And if we had, it would have been exhausted by now anyhow. Many of the displaced workers started receiving benefits in February, March, so their jobless benefits are ending this month or next month. We have raised the issue before, and we raise it again. A crisis for many families is looming unless the federal government somehow finds a way to extend the federal unemployment program for Guam. What we now need from the Department of Labor is a breakdown of how many jobless beneficiaries have lost their unemployment benefits and how many will soon lose their benefits as the weeks unfold. We will also need numbers from the Labor Department of how many displaced workers found jobs through the department's programs. These are some of the most important data the public should get at this point. This will tell us as a community how tough things will be for our neighbors, relatives, our friends, and for others who call Guam home. We don't have the kind of safety net for the sheer number of people who are facing a financial freefall. And if the rent moratorium ends, then the situation will change from bad to worser. These numbers and our local government's plan to address this monumental challenge must be laid out now for the public to hear. It seems our local government is simply hoping the federal government will come through with another rescue. Here's kind of the mental image of our government planning. If you're not on Facebook, I'm holding crossed fingers up to the camera. This passes for government. Let's just keep our fingers crossed. But what if Uncle Sam's rescue package comes too little, too late for Guamanians? Is it asking too much to expect a more proactive GovGuam, one that cares about the plight of all Guam workers? And of course, we can all dwell on the fact that when a lot of people were flat out of work, no job at all, we had government employees paid to stay home. And we had senators tripling over themselves to provide double pay for those who actually went to work. Remember that? So here we are, and let's just speculate a little bit. Let's say that no more money comes from the U.S., that we're left to our own devices. And I'm going to speculate a little bit more right after the break. I'll be back in about 90 seconds.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
We all need to fight COVID-19, and we need all the weapons we can get to beat it. Your smartphone could be one of the most powerful tools to battle this pandemic. The Guam COVID Alert Exposure Notification app can let you know if you've been exposed to someone who has the virus. Add your phone to the COVID fight by going to guamcovidalert.guam.gov or download it from the App Store or Google Play now. Help Guam stop COVID-19.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific. Banking on the Pacific for 66 years.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, so I'm going to speculate a little bit. Let's say, just for the purpose of analysis, that no more money comes from the national government, and we're left to our own devices. The only alternatives that are available is, one, to borrow money, which is exactly what the federal government is doing. They're borrowing literally trillions of dollars to give us today, to spend today, and of course it's going to be several generations downstream that's going to have to pay back the money that is borrowed to give us today to get through this pandemic. So the government of Guam that's an alternative. Let's sell some bonds. Let's get some money so we can hand it out to the people. The other alternative is to reallocate the distribution of wealth here on the island. And by that, I mean this. We have over 11,000 people in the government of Guam who have not missed a paycheck, many of whom stayed home and got paid for staying home. We have, and the Post makes the point, we need to find out how many, but I've heard as few as 20,000 and as many as 35,000 people who are out of work. So a way to get around that, then, is to cut the government of Guam's salaries, cut them in half, say, and distribute the money that's saved from cutting those salaries in half to the people who don't have jobs. That'd be a tough one to do, wouldn't it? And, of course, it's a nice Marxist approach to solving problems. Let's solve our problems by engaging in wealth distribution. I don't think there are any other alternatives. Borrow some money and distribute it to people who don't have jobs, or tune down the government of Guam payroll to create a surplus that can be distributed to people who don't have jobs. If there are any other economic geniuses out there that have a better idea, 888-8255, 888-TALK. And if you want to write it out, you can post it on Facebook. I'm going to find out what Kellis wants to talk about Friday. It's the day after Thursday, Kellis.
How you doing, Judge?
I'm doing great, Kellis.
Okay, so what are the chances that the governor is going to declare a holiday for Black Friday?
Well,
for all these hardworking GovGuam employees, I mean, there are some that are working, but, for the ones that are staying at home, that they can stay at home and continue getting paid.
Well, shouldn't they be paid double then?
That's what I'm beginning to think.
Yeah.
But, what we can do, you missed another point.
Sir.
We can't, because, we cannot cut GovGuam salaries. That's a given. You cannot do that because they're the most important voting bloc on Guam. So instead of that, we need to raise the GRT to 25%.
So we got more money to pass around to the unemployed, right? Yeah, good idea, Kellis.
Yes.
Yeah, why didn't I think of that?
In other words, but the sort of downside is because those evil business owners would not absorb that as they should. You see, they should absorb that cost and then just leave the prices all the same.
Absolutely. Going back to cutting government of Guam salaries, in the 27th Guam legislature, when we had a fiscal crisis, That was a Democrat legislature. Speaker Ben Pangilinan and Majority Leader Lou Leon Guerrero cut the government of Guam work week back to 32 hours. And they cut back the COLA for a lot of retirees. And
yeah, but didn't they get sued for that?
no, they didn't get sued for that. But they got kicked out of office. The next legislature had a Republican majority. Ben Pangilinan went from speaker to private citizen, and Lou came within a gnat's whisker of getting beaten herself. So, you know the old saying, once burned, twice cautious. She may not want to go near that hot stove again. But it seems to me that it's the other alternative is to do nothing. And those people that don't have jobs and don't have a means of subsistence are just going to be on their own. And that looks like what the plan is.
We have property. Gov Guam has some nice property.
Well,
they could sell.
Our penchant is to give whatever property we have, to give it away. I give you the Chamorro Land Trust
Yeah,
Commission.
that's what I'm sitting there thinking about. I was hoping that maybe we could accidentally, do something with it. But I'm sorry, I forgot. We're Gov Guam.
Right.
I got to go. I'm sorry. I wish I could talk more.
Good talking to you, Kellis. Okay, and then I've got, before I go into the next item on the, before I start the card, I'll take some phone calls here. So I've got John who wants to talk about the election results. Go ahead, John. Tell me what you want to tell me.
Yeah, so I just listened to a segment about whether or not we can trust the results of an election dominated by mail-in ballots. Excuse me. So the thing is that never before in our history have we had something like the pandemic, and
except in 1918.
Well, that is true. However, to have a pandemic, also have the means to be able to expand voting to the extent that we did through mail-in ballots. Also, there is no evidence of widespread fraud. We have a candidate, President Trump.
Can I interrupt you for just a second, John?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the point is not whether there is evidence of chicanery. The point that article made, and I've been making myself, is that from a distance, it doesn't look right. And the perception is just as important as reality when you're dealing with an election. And that's why this editorial and I say, let's go back to paper ballots and let's get it all done quickly, even if mail-in ballots is easier. Go ahead, John.
So with a paper ballot, though, are we guaranteed to have results that we could trust? You know, because we had in the last election, if you remember, because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, the claim was made by President Trump that the only reason she gained the popular vote was due to election fraud, with no evidence whatsoever. So claims of election fraud can expand from mail-in ballots.
I'll tell you what, just for the purpose of this discussion, I'll concede all your points on election fraud. But, you know, that's not the point that I'm trying to get at here. The point I'm trying to get at is that when you draw it out for so long and you have mail-in ballots, and I've used this example before, John, let's say we have mail-in ballots and the word is circulated, Bob's having an election party. Come on over to Bob's house. Barbecue, free beer, football game on TV. Just all you got to do is just bring your ballot along. And Bob's meeting you at the front door. Just give me that ballot. I'll take care of it for you. Go in, get yourself a beer, get yourself something to eat. And at the end of the day, I walk out of there with a couple hundred ballots that I mark for my candidate and put them in the box.
No, I do agree that the process that we had used for the mail-in ballots does lend itself to maybe a suspicion of election fraud, or and not necessarily that there is. And so if that's your point, then yes, I would agree with you that mail-in ballots may not necessarily lend itself to election fraud, but does lend itself to the perception. So I'll agree with you with that.
All right, John.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for calling, John. Good talking to you.
Hey, you're welcome. Good.
Okay, so, Dr. Ron. Boy, I'm not going to get to the card here for a while. I got Dr. Ron McNinch on the line. Good afternoon, Ron.
Hey, howdy, Senator. How's it going?
Also known as the Georgia Peach. Georgia is the focus now, Ron. So
I'll tell you.
You are the prognosticator, so I want you to call the runoff for us right now.
Well, it's going to be an interesting election, that's for sure. I think at least one is going to go Republican. So I think at least Purdue seems to be pretty safe from all indications. I think Loeffler has a bit more of a race, but she could even also prevail. And again, you probably mentioned this already on your show also, Senator, this really relates to who controls the U.S. Senate.
Of course.
Because the Republicans have exactly 50, and so there's 2 open seats in Georgia, and Georgia's the only one with open seats right now. And so if the Democrats can get those 2 open seats, it'll be 50-50 tie, and then Kamala Harris gets to vote on everything. And so, in effect, the Democrats will rule the Senate.
The Democrats will rule the world if they win that runoff.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a quite an interesting race. And, I have to say, though, nationally, the point that you're making about all of the issues related to U.S. mainland politics and the way that they're voting now, in many U.S. jurisdictions, they do not allow the sale of whiskey on Election Day until after the polls close.
We used to do that here, Ron.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason is people would give you a shot in $1 if you voted for their candidate. And so that was part of the game, was that, that's how people would buy votes, is they would buy them through bribery and through basically alcohol. And so this is, there's, how can I say, people who try to claim that these are incredulous kinds of concerns. No, this is history. This is long-standing behavior for the purposes of how people try to manipulate who votes for whom and the payoff that people get for it. I think that it's a completely legitimate concern. I think that we should question. I don't like the open mail-in ballot system where they would mail out a ballot, without knowing who lived at the address, and allow whoever to live at the address mail it back in. That's just asking for fraud. I mean, that's just not fraud. That's asking for fraud, because people are allowed to manipulate the system with that kind of method, and that doesn't uphold the sanctity of the vote. Our votes should be respected. The majority of people, or plurality of people in some cases in the jurisdiction, should be the deciding factor for candidates, not somebody playing games, whether it's playing games with the ballots and how the ballots are distributed and counted, or playing games using hacking on these computer systems that use various computer systems to count votes. It should be very troubling to everyone. I'm troubled. I'm deeply concerned. And I certainly hope that, I heard on one station today that possibly President Trump, before he leaves office, wants to establish a presidential commission to, in a bipartisan way, examine these critical voting issues. I think that they are very, very important.
Well, I've already ruled on the matter, so it's just a matter of that commission finding out what my ruling was and implementing it.
And fixing it. They need to fix what's broken. And I think that definitely, because we've allowed every jurisdiction in the United States to do their own thing, having everyone on the same sheet of music, at least congruent in methods, I think is an important step forward. So we'll see where that goes too.
I don't know how deeply the Congress can get into the methods of voting, because, this really is pretty much a state show. But I think the Congress has the authority to regulate the times, you know, that you must have your election on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And some of the timelines that I suggested, that all votes must be in hand of the polling folks no later than the day before election. And, you know, some of those things, I think the Congress could have the authority to do it. But if we go on like we're doing, we're going to destroy any credibility that our election process has. And then my caller earlier said, well, you know, there's no evidence of election fraud. People that do these kinds of things do it as surreptitiously as they possibly can. You know, every day, not every day, but about once a month, we read about someone embezzling huge sums of money from a businessman here on the island. And you're wondering, how could that possibly be? And the reason was that the embezzler was very careful not to get caught. That's the way people who break the law conduct themselves. They're careful so that they won't be caught.
Pressure, opportunity, and rationalization is the triad of fraud. And certainly these folks, and you know, one thing I've noticed about people who commit fraud, they're very proud of it. Quite often, they're very, you know, brazen about, ha, 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 look what I'm getting away with. And it's just absolutely incredible to see that it just baffles me why. And by the way, I could care less Democrat or Republican on the voting issue, but why would anybody put up with a process that opens itself up to that sort of corruption? And I agree with you 100% on the setting the times and dates, but I think also the Congress can decide what to fund and not to fund vis-a-vis voting support, which can have some influence on how states handle things, albeit an indirect influence through grants and things like that. But very good show, sir.
Okay, Ron, thanks for calling.
Hey, thank you so much.
Okay, let's take a break here, Jose.
Fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
Contact tracing is key to containing COVID-19. That's why we're introducing the Guam COVID Alert app. According to Oxford University, for every 100 to 200 downloads of this app, 100 infections can be prevented and 1 life can be saved. Help save a life. Go to guamcovidalert.guam.gov or download the app from the App Store or Google Play now. Add your phone to the COVID fight. Help Guam stop COVID-19.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mezcla. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro and Mezcla Dos are open for takeout and delivery services. More details, call the Hagåtña location at 479-2652 or Mezcla Dos Upper Tumon at 646-6295. Get your Mezcla fix at the comfort of your home.
Okay, we got about 10 more minutes here till that big halftime show on Tall Tales, so I can start the card now. And this is what I've got on the card. First bout on the card, a journalistic cheap shot versus the Shippo. Therese Terlahi versus history, again. Mary Torres, Bill 312 versus the merit system, update. Dairy farmers and the Republicans versus the governor. I was thinking about naming it De La Valle versus the governor, but a lot of folks don't know what De La Valle makes. Do you know, Jose?
No, I don't know.
De La Valle is the #1 manufacturer of milking machines in the United States.
You know, 2 summers ago, I went to a dairy farm and saw a automated milking process.
Yeah.
That was interesting. I wonder if that's the same company.
Yes. And while we're on the subject here, Uncle Harry used to have 30 head of dairy cattle and a 160-acre farm, and he made a good living off of that. You can't do that anymore because the way things are set up now, you have to have equipment that takes the milk from the cow's udder all the way to the milk bottle without ever being touched by a human, close to humans. It goes from one pipe to et cetera, et cetera. And the cost of installing this kind of stuff is so much that the family farmer can't afford it. So now you have these huge corporate dairy, it's not even correct to call them farms, you know.
Production houses.
Yeah, where they produce milk. That's De La Valle. Anyhow, it's, I should say, De La Valle and the Republicans versus the governor. Kentucky's Attorney General versus Levin Camacho, kind of showing Levin how it's done. Tucker Carlson versus Sidney Powell. Democrats versus Big Law. Tall Tales versus Justice Alito. I'm taking Justice Alito to the woodshed on this one. And BLM, Black Lives Matter versus Antifa. Now, I've mentioned this before, but if you want to pick up on Tall Tales and you miss a live broadcast, go to Jungle Watch. It's at junglewatch.info because the episodes are posted every day shortly after they run. You can watch it there. You can make comments on the Jungle Watch comment section. You don't even need to identify yourself. You can go in there, call yourself whatever you could call yourself Tailgater Champion if you want to, and leave your comments. And I've started something new yesterday. I put the card and the program notes for the day's program on Jungle Watch. So if you tune in, if you go to Jungle Watch, say at 3:30 or so, you could see what's coming up on Jungle Watch in the afternoon. So I not only post the card, but I post something called program notes. And today's program notes read like this. The card begins with, quote, some, suggesting that Shippo Patrick Lujan has a conflict of interest. Who is some? Therese Terlahi again revises the history of the Chamorro Land Trust Act. Janella adds to the Bill 312 saga. De La Valle, Inc. takes issue with the milkmaid, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. Kentucky's AG contrasts with ours. Tucker Carlson calls the bet on Sidney Powell. Democrats are slamming law firms that represent Trump. Justice Alito incurs the wrath of Tall Tales. Black Lives Matter versus Antifa. Aunt Florence always said not to expect an honest partner in a dishonest deal. So I'll be posting program notes like that from every day along with the card. So if you want to get, have your program there alongside your box of popcorn as you're enjoying the episode of Tall Tales, that's the way to do it. And then I didn't list the lead item on the card, which may very well be the most important item on the card. My bad. But the lead item on the card is called GEC, Guam Election Commission, versus Michelle Ongakta and Michael Gumatautau. Election Commission versus Michelle Ongakta and Michael. Did Michelle Ongakta run for some office? Was Michael Gumatautau a candidate? No. Here's what it meant. Here's how it goes. Members of the Election Commission removed 2 individuals from the list of Agana voters over election law violations and raised concerns about the Hagåtña mayor's office residency verification that people also use to obtain federal food aid, a passport, and a real ID, among other things. A person challenged the residency of Michelle Ongakta and Michael Gumatautau, who served as Hagåtña precinct officials during the November 3 election day. GEC Counsel Vince Camacho and GEC Executive Director Maria Pangilinan said, GEC, by unanimous vote, sustained or sided with the administrative challenge. They concluded that Ongakta and Gumatautau, based on a review of the evidence, do not currently live in Hagatnya and shouldn't have served as Hagatnya precinct officials. Quote, keep in mind, in order for you to be a precinct official in your precinct, you have to be a registered voter of that precinct. So in order to be a registered voter of that precinct, you have to be a resident of that precinct. That makes a lot of sense. Prior to making a decision, GEC asked the two to submit evidence disproving or confirming the residency complaint against them. They presented Hagatnya Mayor's Office residency verifications. So this is what that amounts to. If you want a verification that you live in any one of the villages, you go to your village mayor and they will give you a verification. So when you go to get your real ID driver's license, you have to show a real Social Security card, proof of American citizenship, and that where you actually live, what your street address is. And you can get that from the mayor's office. And of course, the story says you also need that for federal food aid, your SNAP card. So these two, Ongakta and Gumatautau, presented Hagatnya Mayor's Office residency verifications. End of story, right? They got verifications from the mayor's office. Should be it. The address that the mayor's office certified as the place of residence for Ongakta, for example, is an abandoned house on West O'Brien Drive with boarded up windows and plants growing in it, Camacho said. And there's, yeah, and if you were to go inside that house, there's a secret passage that takes you straight from that house to the 19th floor. Yeah, now there's a picture of this house in the paper. Yeah, and it's...
Is that the actual house?
Yeah. So this is a blatant violation of both the mayor's certification as well as the individual swearing that she lives in the house. This is some pretty heavy-duty stuff. GEC members, led by Vice Chairperson Alice Tyron, who's no stranger to the 19th floor, by the way. The plot thickens. Said they will be sending Attorney General Levin Camacho the information surrounding the two voters for his office's disposition. I would expect it to be the Attorney General's disposition. One of the Hagatnya precinct officials is a former employee at the Hagatnya mayor's office, while the second is still employed at the mayor's office. So, of course, they wanted to be poll watchers, you know. I wonder who they wanted to win.
It's a mystery.
Yeah.
A very short mystery.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll come back to the abandoned house in Hagatnya right after the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagatnya, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Let the transition process begin. I'm Carmen Roberts, Fox News. That's the directive from President Trump as he clears the way for the GSA to give the Biden team transition information and funds.
They now have $7.5 million in federal resources to officially begin the transition. That is something that Biden transition has been growing very impatient about. President Trump has already responded. He says that his legal challenges are still going to continue, but that he wants the GSA administrator to do whatever she can or to do whatever she thinks is right, because he says he knows she's been harassed, threatened, and abused, and he does not want to see that happen to her or her family.
Fox's Peter Ducey. But President Trump says he's not giving up on his fight to win the election. One of those efforts is happening in Georgia, where the Trump campaign called for a second recount of ballots.
Last week's statewide hand audit of ballots confirmed President-elect Joe Biden's 12,000 vote lead in Georgia. But state elections officials say this week's machine recount will provide the final certified result, if the number is different. The recount comes as Georgia's two Republican U.S. senators campaign for January 5th runoffs against well-funded Democrats. Georgia's Republican Secretary of State insists there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, and he continues to refuse calls by Senators Perdue and Kelly Loeffler for him to step down. But some of the president's supporters are demanding more, including a special session of the Georgia legislature.
Fox's Jonathan Seri. As that and a recount in Wisconsin play out, President-elect Biden's moving ahead with picking his cabinet. Among his choices, longtime aide Anthony Blinken as Secretary of State and former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. That according to sources familiar with the decision. And a positive day on Wall Street, with the Dow gaining 327 points. America's listening to Fox News.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
As we celebrate Thanksgiving this year in a very different way, the team at Security Title has been busy focusing on the things that we are grateful for. Without exception, our gratitude starts with the love of family and the faith in the future of our island. We are grateful for the meaningful work supporting our realtors, lenders, buyers and sellers, and other partners in the real estate industry. From the Security Title family, we wish you and yours a very blessed Thanksgiving.
Many Americans are ignoring the CDC's advice to stay home for Thanksgiving, and a lot of folks are upset over new COVID clampdowns.
14 states have now issued travel restrictions and quarantine orders ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday, but some are finding it difficult to take orders from Democrats breaking their own rules. Two top Democrats in Brooklyn slammed for attending an indoor birthday party last weekend for a prominent New York developer. Photos show few guests wearing masks. In Buffalo, cell phone video shows fed-up gym owners shouting away a health inspector and police who tried to break up their meeting. The group of about 50 people were not wearing masks and said they were protesting Erie County's latest restrictions that shut down gyms and other businesses deemed high risk.
Fox's Aisha Hasni. A federal appeals court sides with Texas and Louisiana and rules they can cut funding to Planned Parenthood clinics.
Pro-life groups had sought to eliminate federal Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood because some clinics associated with the organization perform abortions. Women's advocates and abortion rights supporters opposed the move, saying it would deny women the right to choose medical providers for needed health services not linked to abortion. The ruling reverses a lower court decision blocking a Texas ban on Medicaid funding to Planned Parenthood. Rich Dennison, Fox News.
And a consumer advocacy group releases a list of the 10 worst toys of the year. Among them, cute plastic animals with tiny accessories that pose a choking hazard, Black Panther-inspired claws with the potential to cause facial or eye injuries, and a green slime that could be harmful if swallowed. The group, World Against Toys Causing Harm, puts out the list annually. The Toy Association, which represents toy makers, calls the list needlessly alarmist. I'm Carmen Roberts, and this is Fox News.
Rolling sound, quiet, and action.
The Ray Gibson Show. Starring Senator Mona Silva Tyron as the news anchor.
I'm Mona Silva Tyron, and I'll have your local news every morning. Life moves pretty fast, so stay with us to stay informed right here on The Point.
Also starring Jerry Roberts as the Better Business Training Guru.
Get out there and do something good today, like listen to us Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m., where we go extra for you.
Produced by the real Joe Cruz. And your warm and intelligent host, Ray Gibson.
It's the Gibson Stream of Consciousness. All the players and all the games with cameos and calls from the most interesting people like you. We'll see and hear you right here on your talk radio superstation. This is The Point.
The Ray Gibson Show was filmed before a live Facebook audience.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Hagåtña and Mezcla Dos Upper Tumon are now open for takeout and delivery services. For more information, call now at 479-2652 or 3 or Mezcla Dos at 646-6295. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro brings you island hospitality with the true taste of modern Chamorro cuisine at the comfort of your own home. They take your local favorite dishes and serve them with extra flair you will only find at Mezcla. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific. Banking on the Pacific for 66 years.
Okay, so here we are after that big halftime show, and I'm back at the Hagåtña mayor's office. Before the break, we talked about Michelle Ongakta and Michael Gumatauto, neither of whom live in Hagåtña, both of whom were poll watchers at the Hagåtña election facility. Apparently, both of them filed false papers in order to obtain residency verification. At least Michelle Ongakta did. So the article goes on to say, questions remain. Attorney Patrick Seville, an independent member of the GEC, asked the commission's counsel and executive director whether the Hagåtña mayor knew about the facts of this matter. That's really pretty important, because now the race in Hagåtña was uncontested. John Cruz did not have an opponent, but let's say that he did. And let's say that the same procedure was enabled here so that his employees, but people who didn't live in the village, could be poll watchers. That goes back again to the perception that the election wasn't fair because the people who were supposed to see to it that the election was fair had violated the law. So it's really important to find out if the mayor knew about this, because although the mayor, the story here says that the Hagåtña mayor's office residency verification, it's not the Hagåtña mayor's office. I go through this every day. There's no such person as the Hagåtña mayor's office. The person who is responsible for issuing these verifications is the mayor. Now, he doesn't have to sit down at the typewriter and type all this stuff up and put papers in and out of the filing cabinet, but I have a feeling that he probably signs the verification. And a rule to keep in mind is this, that once you sign a paper, even if you never saw it before, it's yours. So you don't have to have a printing press at home to print a check. And if someone else fills out all the numbers on the check and all the words and you sign it, guess whose check it is? So it's the same way here. So it's really important to find out how this happened. And the finger of suspicion points straight at the mayor. Well, they work for him and, you know, he needed poll watchers. And
is it a requirement that those who work in the mayor's office have to be from that village?
No, that's not a requirement. Yeah. Obviously not, right?
Obviously not.
Yeah. Vince Camacho said the mayor's office employed or employs the two individuals. GEC member Joe Mofness said a lot of times mayors themselves do not issue the residency verification, but this duty is delegated to their administrative assistant or other employees. I would say that that's an impermissible delegation. And even if it isn't, you could delegate the delegate the authority sometimes, but you can't delegate the responsibility. Other GEC officials said the mayor's verification is required from people who are applying for federal food stamps or applying for the Real ID that is used to obtain a passport or go into military bases. They asked GEC counsel whether there may be consequences related to issuing false or fraudulent mayor's residency verification. These are all really important questions. Vince Camacho, counsel for the GEC, said it will be up to the office of the Attorney General. It's probably up to the Attorney General what it intends to do with the information that GEC will be sending. GEC also earlier nullified, that's not that important. So I think the import here is the old days are over. The old days of, well, yeah, you know, I live in Tamuning, but, you know, I grew up in Barragata, and I'm really to Barragata, Junai. Sa be ubota gi Barragata na ti zaho di Tamuning. Anak ko na I lines gi Tamuning. So that's kind of been a tradition, you know, that once you have a village that where your heart is, but not where you live. Well, you got to vote where you live, not where your heart is.
Maybe it's a vacation home.
Maybe so.
Lanchero.
But it's not good that people vote in villages where they don't live. But this thing with Ongakta and Gumatau, this is really very serious.
It doesn't say what village they are actually from, though. Huh?
Does not.
I don't think I read that.
No. So this is going to be a real test for our Attorney General. So I think the test is going to be to see if the Attorney General orders spaghetti noodles. Because the suspicion is that the most serious punishment that the Attorney General favors for violations such as this is 20 lashes across the wrist with a wet noodle. So this, as far as Tall Tales is concerned, this is a real test for our Attorney General to see what he does with this. And I hope that the answer is not nothing. Okay, next item on the card. A journalistic cheap shot versus the SHPO. Now, the SHPO is a state historical preservation officer, an office previously held by Linda Uggan until she got fired and then reinstated. She's back in the game now. I guess before I go into this, I'm going to pause for a second. Tina wants to talk about voting. So I'll talk to Tina, and then I'll come back to the SHPO. Good afternoon, Tina.
Hi. Yeah, you know, all this voting this year, for some reason, you know, it's impacted me more than it ever has. And I've been voting for quite some time, and haven't been up on a lot of political stuff that I'm getting, I guess, more interested in as I get older. But why have we, I mean, it's like everything is so cavalier when there's so much at stake with this voting. We can't get it right. I mean, from the U.S. to here to, it just baffles me that we can't seem to figure it out with all the stuff. It's like as if people don't care so that they can have all these loose ends. So cheating and, you know, that kind of stuff can happen. It seems like, has this been going on forever? I mean, I don't know. I just don't get it, that we can't even perfect that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tina. It's sad, isn't it?
I mean, yeah. So it just, I don't know. It just really, I'm kind of sick of it, actually, that we can't, in the 21st century, get a voting that can be as accurate, almost accurate as possible. When they really want to do something, they can get it done. But it seems like they like it like this.
Well, you heard my comments earlier in the program, and to me, the solution is a hackneyed old phrase, back to the basics.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, you know, when I was younger, I didn't really care, and it was probably always going on when I was younger. I mean, I voted for a couple presidents in my time, but I never really cared that much about, you know, I didn't think they would be cheating, but, you know, it's just so funny because I remember when I was younger, there was a sign, and I was like 5 years old, and it said, "Caution, children at play." So I asked my mom, I said, "Mom, hey, does that mean a little child got hit by a car here and got killed?" You know, when you're little, you ask these questions. My mom said, "No, they put that sign there so that children wouldn't get hurt." I don't find that to be the way life is. It's like they're reactive instead of proactive. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, let's wait till the kid gets hit, and then we'll put the signs up. Okay, thanks for calling, Tina.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Okay, so back to a journalistic cheap shot versus the SHPO, State Historical Preservation Officer. The title pretty much describes what the SHPO does, and the SHPO enters into negotiations, or has entered into negotiations with joint, what is it called? The latest title for joint forces Marianas, I can't remember, something like that.
Joint region?
Yeah,
okay, something like that.
The Admiral's representative to come up with this programmatic agreement, and then the SHPO works with officials from the Navy to make sure that the programmatic agreement is complied with. So it's kind of a relationship that the SHPO enters into. It was Linda Uggan till she got fired, and she was replaced by Patrick Lujan. Patrick Lujan is now on active duty with the Air Force Reserve, and during that time he's being replaced by Carlota Leon Guerrero, who is the acting SHPO. So I have this article that ran in the Post. As you were in the Daily News, it's an Anamita Carr article, and not unusual. I take issue with some of the points in the article, but here it goes. The person in charge of leading Guam's sometimes contentious historic preservation negotiations with the military won't be on the job again until early next year because he's on active duty with the military. State Historic Preservation Officer Patrick Lujan is out on active duty with the Air Force Reserve through next year? No. And the governor's chief advisor on military and regional affairs, Carlota Leon Guerrero, is the acting preservation officer until his return. I think he'll be out until April, not the whole year. Meanwhile, major negotiations are on the table. A new programmatic agreement with Joint Region Marianas, there it is. Joint Region Marianas is anticipated to be finalized at the end of this year, which will indefinitely determine how the island's cultural sites are preserved in the face of ongoing Navy activity. Okay, subheading in the article, conflict of interest questions. And here it is. some question if Lujan has a potential conflict of interest due to his role in the military and State Historic Preservation Office's duty to negotiate with the Department of Defense. No, he doesn't negotiate with the Department of Defense. You said in your own story here, you're talking about Joint Region Marianas. That is not the Department of Defense. So Lujan is what's called a drill status reservist in the Air Force Reserve. So if there's a conflict of interest, I think a good place to start would be to identify the two interests that conflict. Well, on the one hand, he's a State Historic Preservation Officer, and in that capacity, he is the governor's representative for State Historic Preservation. He's also a drill status Air Force reservist, and in that particular status, without knowing anything at all about what his, I think they call it the AFC in the Air Force, like a MOS in the Army or the Marine Corps. I don't know what his duties are, but I suspect he's an enlisted man. An enlisted person. And he drills, he goes to weekend drill, and he goes to annual training and is liable to go on longer tours of active duty. But what would the conflict be between a drilling reservist and a Government of Guam employee? I don't see it. And of course, in my gazing around trying to figure this out, I did a little research. And I came across this article from Macomb School of Business, Ethics Unwrapped. A conflict of interest arises when what is in a person's best interest is not in the best interest of another person or organization to which that individual owes loyalty. Well, what's in Patrick Lujan's best interest? Having spent some time in the Army National Guard, which is a reserve component, I know that the soldier or the airman's best interest is in being a good soldier or being a good airman, and that's about it. And that's a lot. So I have a hard time understanding why being a drilling reservist conflicts with any Government of Guam job. We've got about, I think, 1,000 drilling reservists in government employment right now. They're corrections officers, cops, all over the place. So if this is a conflict of interest, where is Talina Nelson right now? I think Talina Nelson's on active duty with the Army National Guard, or is it the Air Guard? I can't remember.
I think it's Army.
Yeah. So if it's a conflict for Patrick Lujan, would it be a conflict for Talina Nelson? A conflict of interest.
Some may say.
Say again?
Some may say.
Yeah, some may say that Talina has a conflict. A conflict of interest arises when what is in a person's best interest is not in the best interest of another person or organization to which that individual owes loyalty. For example, an employee may simultaneously help himself but hurt his employer by taking a bribe. Well, that's not where we are. A conflict of interest can also exist when a person must answer to two different groups whose needs are at odds with each other. Well, I don't think the Air Force Reserve's interests are at odds with the Government of Guam at all, and so on. And if we do have an ethical conflict, if Patrick does have an ethical conflict, who decides and what are the rules? Well, the who decides, pretty easy. We have an ethics commission. Someday somebody's going to wake them up because they were sworn in at the beginning of this year, and so far they haven't done a thing. Not a thing. But we do have a code of ethics for government of Guam workers. It's at 4 GCA, section 15205. And this is what it says. No employee shall take any official action directly affecting, 1, business or other undertaking in which the employee has a financial interest. 2, private undertaking in which the employee is engaged as legal counsel, advisor. It's not that. So I go down the whole list. B, no employee shall acquire financial interest. It's not that. C, no employee shall assist any person or business or act in a representative capacity before any territorial agency. It's not that. D, no employee shall assist any person or business or act in a representative capacity for a fee, etc., to secure passage of a bill. It's not that. No employee shall assist any person or business or act in a representative capacity before a territorial agency for a fee. It's not that. Nothing herein shall preclude an employee from having outside business interests or employment, so long as such interests or employment do not interfere with the performance of official duties and not otherwise in direct conflict with this chapter. So I don't see it. And just an interesting but irrelevant footnote, there are members of the United States Congress who are members of reserve components. Lindsey Graham was one, as an example. So this is what I think is really important in this article. Some question if Lujan has a potential conflict of interest due to his role in the military and the State Historic Preservation Office's duty to negotiate with the Department of Defense. Who is this person, some? Where do they live? Do they live in Hagatnya? Or what village do they live in? Or is there really anybody called some? So if you're going to toss something like this out and in a sense make it a little bit more difficult for the SHPO to do what's already not an easy job, then wouldn't your journalistic ethics require you to get a statement from somebody other than some? Maybe Ron McNinch, who seems to like to opine on matters such as this, or Judy Guthertz, who was the author of our ethics bill, Senator Judy Guthertz. You could call tall tales, and I'll tell you the right answer. Any one of those would work. But when a reporter says some question if Lujan is a potential conflict of interest, you know what that means to me, Jose?
What does that mean?
It means Adamita Carr has a question. In other words, the reporter
has some,
but it's not important enough to her to chase down someone she could interview, so she's going to insert her own opinion into a news story as though it's news and not opinion.
There seems to be a pattern here.
Tell me more. Yeah.
It's predictable.
Yeah, I think very predictable from this particular reporter. Some question if Lujan is a potential conflict of interest. All right.
It is interesting that it made the above the fold front page.
Exactly, and you can see in the online edition there's one sentence about what some question, and it's that big black subheadline. Now, we know that there are some people whose news gathering consists of reading headlines, and they don't go into the article. Patrick Lujan, conflict of interest, I guess. Yeah, he's in the military or defense or something like that. Irresponsible. Okay, I've got Therese Terlahi versus history again. And Let's see, I think I recognize this number, so I'm going to take this next call here before I go into Therese Terlahi versus history again. Yeah, it's Martinez. And I'll bet Martinez wants to talk about conflict of interest. Yeah. So tell me about conflict of interest, Martinez.
Before that, I got home pretty recently from a medical appointment, and the bus driver was playing Tall Tales on the radio. What do you think about that?
Well, it's good for the folks who ride the bus because they're making good use of their time on the bus, Martinez.
That's correct. Now, since I just got home, you brought this up.
And by the way, Martinez, you know that Tall Tales is the top-rated FM afternoon talk show, don't you?
When you say FM, are you talking about, well, there is a radio talk show. In fact, there's 3 radio talk shows in the afternoon that are on both FM and AM. Are you including those 3 shows?
No, I'm just including FM, just 93.3.
Well, they're on FM also, so you're not saying they're the top rated if you include them? Because they're also on FM.
You mean that K57 is on FM?
Yeah, it's on both FM and AM.
So I didn't know that.
Yep.
Well, maybe I better go back to my Raiders then, because when I first achieved this high rating, Tall Tales was the only FM radio talk show.
Well, now you're one of 4.
4?
There's one, as you know, between 1,200 and 1,400. One between 1,400. No, I'm sorry. In the afternoon, there's only 2. One between 1,400, 1,200 and 1,400, and one between 1,400 and 1,800. And then yours. The other one's on the afternoon. So there's 3 FM radio shows. Are you still saying you're the top one?
No, I was laboring under the misapprehension that this was the only FM radio talk show.
Well, now that you know there's 2 others and there's 3, would you still say you're the top one, or no?
I'm going to have to ask the statistical branch of the Tall Tales think tank to rework the numbers.
Well, since the numbers are not in yet and officially haven't been counted, you're still the #1 elect radio station or radio show in the afternoon.
Oh, there's
the #1 what radio show in the afternoon?
Elect.
What do you mean by let?
Elect.
Elect.
Yes, because
what do you mean by elect?
Because all the ballots haven't been counted yet, and we just got this information.
When will you know which one of the 3 is the top-rated FM talk show in the afternoon?
It's whatever one Martinez is calling right now.
Well, so you say, well, we got to hear it out of the senator's mouth, too, if he says he's #1. But anyway, before I get to my point, today at, was it 1342, another Joe called up one of the FM radio stations. Another Joe called up the competitor at 1342 today, just to let you know, Bob. Okay?
Well, it's a free country. He's free to call any talk show that...
right.
That
just to let you know, he called up the competitor. Yeah. That's true. But going on, are you saying it is a conflict of interest to SHPO, or it's not a conflict of interest?
Not a conflict of interest.
Senator, I think it is a conflict of interest. Senator, are you biased because we know you're pro-military, and this guy's probably pro-military, and therefore you're biased in your call?
Of course. You must always start out with that proposition that when someone disagrees with you that he's biased. But I went through a rather long explanation of what I thought the applicable law and facts were on this particular matter, and I don't see a conflict of interest between a drilling Air Force reservist and a government of Guam employee.
Well, even if you put the law aside, do you think there is a conflict of interest?
No.
Well, I think there is. If he's going to wear the military uniform, even at times, and benefit from it, and he has a job that deals with how the military is treating Gov Guam and you know, and the land and everything, there's got to be a conflict of interest because he's wearing the military uniform. Do you think if he comes out strongly against the military, he's going to get promoted wearing that uniform? I mean, let's be real here.
Are you sure that you're not just showing your own bias here, Martinez?
No, I'm not showing my bias. The point is, he's in the military, even if it's part-time, and now he's the shippo dealing with, working with the military.
Yeah.
So he's obviously tainted to be biased in favor of them. If he goes against them, there's potential for him to be injured or harmed. And the perception of a conflict of interest is a conflict of interest. I mean, it's definitely a conflict of interest. And I called this up on the Ray Gibson show this morning, the same thing. And I think Ray agreed with me it's a conflict of interest.
Well, we don't have stare decisis here. A matter decided on the Ray Gibson show is not binding on Tall Tales.
Well, I just think it's a strong conflict of interest. He should not be doing it at all.
Let me counter then. You think it's a strong? I don't think it is a conflict of interest. This is a pretty poignant conversation. But I've given you my analysis. I've read the law. I've read from that website from the business company, and I've explained exactly what if there is an interest. His interest is in being a good Air Force Reserve airman. That's his interest. And what he does on his civilian occupation really has nothing to do with it. And then I also brought up the specter of what about Talina Nelson? She's a senator and an Army Guardsman. Does she have a conflict of interest?
Well, Talina Nelson is not the shippo who's going to deal directly with government land that the military is involved with. That's a complete difference. He's dealing directly with this as the shippo.
Yeah, well, and she has no legislative, in her capacity as a legislator, she could have nothing to do with any of these issues?
Well, if she feels there's a conflict, she could recuse herself on that issue, but that shouldn't prevent her from running for senator. She could recuse herself, but there's a direct conflict, and I think military.
Restating your position is not persuasion. What about our code of ethics, which I went through that, and it isn't nothing in the code of ethics would prescribe his conduct, or his being a reservist.
Even without the code of ethics, there is a conflict of interest. Because the code listed, there is a conflict of interest.
Actually, there isn't a conflict of interest. But anyhow, anything else, Martinez?
That's all, Senator.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
As the island takes a stand against the coronavirus, so do the professionals at Horizon Properties. As a property owner and with the current health scare the island is facing, the last thing you should worry about is collecting rental payments or sending out a repairman to your property. Let Horizon Properties take care of that for you as you remain safe at home. Call Horizon Properties at 646-7616 or 777-7792. You can also visit them at www.horizonproperties.com. Horizon Properties, always there for you.
Seventh inning stretch, Wrigley Field, Chicago, and we're coming back from Wrigley Field to find out what Kellis thinks about conflict of interest. Kellis had so much fun with his first call that he's back on the Ferris wheel again. Good afternoon, Kellis.
Good afternoon, Judge. So what I was thinking about when I was hearing the gentleman talking about this conflict of interest, I'm saying, if you are a resident of Guam, there is a conflict of interest because the very life that you're leading here is because the United States military, came here and kicked the Japanese out. So in that idea, I would be, as a resident, conflicted on, well, I don't want them to leave. So let me do it in favor for them. So according to what he's saying is we should only have people who are not residents of Guam as in the SHPO and not in the military and have no interest at all in Guam.
Well, that's an interesting approach, Kellis. I'm
using his logic, saying that this person, since he's in the military, obviously he has a conflict of interest in this position. And I'm saying, as a resident of Guam and as a family, my family survived the occupation, and there's a debt of gratitude to the military, and for decades, for years, the Chamorros are the highest percentage of military, in the United States military. So I'm like going, how can you not have a conflict of interest using his idea if you're from Guam or has some but not even if you're from Guam, from Guam from the war, but if you're now living here currently on Guam as an FSM migrant, that's here right now, they are enjoying the fruits of the military. You know, understand what I'm saying?
So obviously they're going to have a pro-military bias, right?
Yes. Everyone, using his logic, everyone would be a pro-military logic. And so the only people that should be the SHPO on Guam is they cannot be a resident. They cannot have been in the military or any family member in the military, and not know anyone from Guam.
I got you, Kellis.
What do you think?
Well, there's always this tension between what are called, back in the day when we didn't have to be so politically correct.
Yeah.
Men,
I think we're overly politically correct right now to the point that, where there's 50-something or 100-something different genders.
Right. So
and, this is where we're going.
I'm about to say that there's always this tension between men of affairs and then
you can't say men.
Then potential bias or conflict. So, we could find people to take all of these jobs who knew absolutely nothing about anything, and they wouldn't have any conflict of interest. They wouldn't be worth a darn on their jobs.
They wouldn't be worth a darn.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that the ability to...
But they're good politicians.
The other thing is that there's the mere ability to ascribe a potential bias to someone does not equate to a conflict of interest. A person could be completely unbiased and have a conflict of interest, or have strong bias and no conflict of interest. But anyhow...
it's how the person does their job.
Well...
And just because they're from Guam or in the military, et cetera, no.
If there's going to be a conflict of interest, you have to identify the interests that conflict, not not kind of gloss over it. Yeah. Okay, Kellis, so thanks for helping me out on that one.
You have a good one.
All right. So next we're going to talk about the ethical dimensions of pulling into a drive-through. Yeah. It's time for Drive-Through Jack. Hello, Jack.
Good afternoon, Bob. How are you this?
Doing fine, yeah.
Doing so. I was listening to Paps, and I look at it that him being in the military actually adds to his qualification. Now, if we're talking about being an accountant down at the port, maybe Paps had a point there. But no, I look at it that him being in the military actually adds to his qualification. Am I wrong to put that in that perspective?
Well, it's a treacherous ground,
Okay.
because a person being qualified or being unqualified doesn't necessarily mean conflict of interest or an unqualified person can have a conflict of interest. A qualified person can have a conflict of interest. That isn't the policy that the idea of conflict of interest addresses.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really looking at it as conflict of interest, but looking at it as a qualification as in being SHPO.
Okay.
Knowing how the military handles agreements, how it handles MOUs, how it handles contracts. I'm looking at if you were in the military or are currently in the military or in a reserve capacity or whatever, that sort of background that you have actually lends to your qualification to being SHPO.
Well, just to take the contrary view, I did a hitch in the Marine Corps, and I know a lot about swabbing decks and cleaning up heads and carrying rifles and close order drill and driving a weapons carrier and stuff like that. But I don't know anything about military contracting or MOUs or whatever. I think that military service and nothing more doesn't lend itself to the analysis one way or the other. My focus is this, that a drilling guardsman, the interest of a drilling guardsman is to have a successful reserve career. And he does that, they do that by being good soldiers or good airmen. What they do in their civilian job has no bearing on their success in their reserve career. And the converse is also true. Their success as a reservist has nothing to do with their ability to be good at being a SHPO. It's just, we talk, hardly a day goes by without people thinking that they tuned into a horticulture show, because I'm always comparing apples and oranges, but that's a classic apples and oranges, Jack.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think a person with a military career or military or even a veteran or a background in the military does add to an experience of a person and bumps him up a degree and a job that they're applying for. But I might be wrong, because we could both be accountants right now down there at the port and do a good job and get a bump in the raise, even though we've been swabbing decks, or in my case, parking and receiving planes.
Yeah.
But I just think there's a lot of things that are being overblown, and
as you heard, I think the overblowing here is the reporter throwing in this think it's a conflict of interest, We wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for that. And I'm more critical of her than I am either of the Joint Region Marianas, the SHPO, the Air Force Reserve, or any of the other players. I look for more from a newspaper.
Well, I heard a mother talking to her child the other day. He says, you got to quit lying or you're going to grow up to become a journalist. So, it's interesting times. But so anyways, Bob, you have a good afternoon, all right?
Thanks, Jack. I'm going to take a short break, and down the home stretch, I'm going to be chatting with Marvin about vote fraud.
Did you know your smartphone is one of the most powerful tools in our fight against COVID-19? That's why we're bringing you the Guam COVID Alert Exposure Notification app. Developed by Google, Apple, and the PathCheck Foundation, the app works by letting you know if you've been exposed to someone who's positive. It's completely voluntary, and more importantly, it's anonymous. Add your phone to the COVID fight. Go to guamcovidalert.guam.gov or download it from the App Store or Google Play now. Help Guam stop COVID-19.
Okay, Google. Hey, Siri. Hi, Bixby.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Open the Point app. Opening.
Live stream, on demand, swap stations. Check out the visual radio. Get the free app available on the App Store and Google Play, or go to thepoint.gu. Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific. Banking on the Pacific for 66 years.
Okay, so I'm going to get to Marvin in just a second. I noticed that Andrew has chimed in on the top-rated afternoon FM radio talk show, and Andrew says the Electoral College has not met yet, so Tall Tales has a fighting chance to retain the title of the most listened to FM radio talk show in the Pacific. No, I never said we were the most listened to talk show. I just said we were top rated based on my theory that there's only one FM station. But if K57 is also broadcasting on FM, which means frequency modulation, then, but you did call it, didn't you, Jose?
We did call it.
How did you call it?
We called it, you are the number one rated radio show elect.
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 Until there's a certification.
Until there's a certification. Right?
Yeah, elect. Okay, I got it. Okay, let's chat with Marvin a little bit about, what did Marvin want to talk about?
Voter fraud in the U.S.
Voter fraud. Tell me about voter fraud, Marvin.
Hello, do you hear me? I can hear the tone.
I can hear you 5 by 5.
Oh,
Marvin.
good. I can hear the swish. There's normally the swish where you have the. I happen to be an broadcast engineer. I'm used to when the hybrid sends out a tone to balance the line. Anyway, yeah, I just wanted to mention you got a guy call up and say there's absolutely no evidence of any voter fraud. And I'm sure you probably went. I mean, I don't listen every minute, every day. I try to catch your show as much as I can, but I'm sure you went through the process. It's almost impossible to prove that there was no voter fraud because they only have the ballots now. Once they separate the ballots from the mail-in, the only evidence when you go in to vote. I mean, I'm from Michigan. I'm talking from. Originally, I was born in Michigan. I've been here my whole life. But my mom still lives there and everything. She's fit to be tied about the election, right? So I've kind of been following it. But as soon as these mail-ins and stuff, the only evidence you have that that's an actual voter, registered voter, is the envelope. Once the ballot's pulled out, that's just a blank ballot. I mean, it's just a ballot. And
here's another angle, Marvin. I didn't want to bring this up with that caller. Because I wanted to steer it back to the point that I made with that editorial that it's perception. But I hear this all the time. There's no evidence of voter fraud, and it always comes from the Democrat side of the room. Well, there's apparently a misunderstanding, maybe deliberate misunderstanding of what constitutes evidence. And the Republican lawyers have trotted out affidavits from all over the place. Well, an affidavit is evidence. It is a sworn statement from someone stating under oath what they saw or sensed or whatever. Now, how much weight you give to that evidence is an interesting question. But if you have 20 affidavits saying, I saw voter fraud in Detroit, you can't say, well, there's no evidence of voter fraud in Detroit. We haven't seen any. All we saw is those affidavits. There's no evidence. Right. And that's right. And that's what the caller was saying. But I didn't want to deviate from the point that I was making.
Right. No, I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, what they're doing, what the scary thing is they're messing with the integrity of people, believing it's actually, their vote actually counts and it actually makes a difference and it's not just rigged. Can I tell you a couple of things that I know about Michigan? Okay, it's Wayne County. All right, statistically, there's all kinds of statistical evidence, but that doesn't count. I mean, you can't. No. There's impossibilities, absolute impossibilities. In Wayne County, for example, Wayne County is Detroit, but it's Metro Detroit. It includes Pontiac, outlying areas.
Pontiac, Buick, Chevrolet, Ford.
Oh, exactly.
Lincoln, Mercury.
There's Republican conservative areas, and there's Democratic areas, and there's Metro Detroit. Okay, there's anyway, the percentage. I was kind of following that, and there was actually a report in why they didn't want to certify those votes back there, showing by precinct generally the Democratic-leaning precincts of registered voters was around 15%. The conservative Republican voters, it was between 80 and 85%. Then they have this whole long list of precincts which had 0 registered voters, but would have, the other precincts would have 800 people, maybe up to 2,000 people, 2,500, 2512, 173,000 people, and they have no way to trace it. They've got precincts in Michigan. They're not only more than 100% of the people voted, they're 150% of actual people. There's more people who voted than live in the precincts, including children. Okay, and that's why they had 73% of, when they went to the canvassing board, the 4 people who were supposed to certify it wouldn't certify it. 2 of them were Republican, 2 Democrats, and they harassed them. And they finally says, "Well, you do an audit later," which was a lie because they're not doing it. But it's because 73%, they can't. That's like when you balance your checkbook. It's impossible to rectify. There's so many extra votes, and all these votes came, 173,000 votes, and 96% of them were all for Biden and Biden only, and they came in at 4 a.m. After they stopped counting. They came in after everybody went home and nobody's around. All these votes showed up, but now there's no way to prove it because all these ballots have been shuffled in with everything else. And they just have a vote on them. They don't have who voted, where they're from. There's no way to track it. And the reason why, understanding a ballot is so people can't, repercussions for who you voted for. But that means you got to have security when you go in to vote. And you can't just have massive mail-ins, and you've got to have chain of custody. I mean, they shut down 6 different counting areas, major swing states, and just sent them. Everybody went home.
Going back to
left all these ballots out.
Going back to what you said about what people are thinking about elections, that they can't be trusted. That's exactly what our caller Tina mentioned a little earlier. She said she never paid that much attention to it before, but she says now it seems like it's really very untrustworthy, and I think that's the real point here. And
that's absolutely, and that's dropping us from the leading democracy in the world to literally banana republic status, where you can't trust it. I mean, I heard this on a different radio show or whatever, where if this would have happened in Ukraine, where the president won on, the 2:00 in the evening, he was ahead by 700,000 votes, but then 3 days later he lost. We'd be over there condemning the Russians for interfering in the election.
Yeah, you heard that. You heard that on this show. I mentioned that. Yeah.
Well, anyway, so they can't this mass mail-in stuff. I don't care about COVID, whatever. I mean, many people, 70 or 80,000 showed up to vote at the polling places. If they could do it, everybody else could do it. Okay, but my mom's 85 and she did absentee, but absentee is different. You go in and you give your ID and you prove who you are and you sign it and you get your ballot and she takes it. This is in Michigan. She took it home, and she filled it out and she took it back to the polling place and delivered it to them. And it's signed on the outside and everything else, and delivered it she dropped it out, not mailed it. So it's different. People get confused between absentee and mail-in. This massive mail-out they did just to everybody on the voter rolls and everything was just a recipe for disaster. I mean, Trump says a lot of stuff, and
hey, Marvin,
his actions versus what he says. But one thing he was right.
Hey, Marvin. Excuse me, Marvin. We're at the end of the rainbow for today, but I'm really glad you called.
All right, I'll let you go.
See you tomorrow.
You have a good evening. Bye bye.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
He gave the transition go-ahead, then played it down. I'm Carmen Roberts. Fox News. President Trump tweeting late last night that his green light to let the GSA give the Biden team transition information and funds is not a signal his legal challenge is losing steam.
The General Services Administration has given ascertainment that President-elect Joe Biden is the apparent winner of the election, a step required to begin the formal transition process. Ascertainment provides millions of dollars for the transition and allows current administration officials to coordinate with incoming administration officials.
Fox's Jared Halpern. The president tweeting, "We are moving full speed ahead. We'll never concede to fake ballots and Dominion." Dominion referring to the maker of voting machines. 2 states are recounting ballots, Georgia for a second time and Wisconsin. Chair of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, tells Fox News they have issues with how Wisconsin applied its election laws.
With over 200,000 people saying they were indefinitely confined